So, we're diving into a classic question today. What is the U.S. equivalent of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police? It seems like a simple question on the surface, but the answer actually tells us a whole lot about the fundamental differences between the United States and Canada.
You know the image, right? That iconic red uniform, the wide-brimmed Stetson hat. It's famous all over the world. And it makes you wonder, okay, so what's the American version of that? Well, the simple answer is there isn't one. Not really. And the reason why there isn't a direct equivalent gets right to the very heart of how these two countries decided to build their law enforcement systems. So let's unpack this.
Okay, first things first. To even begin to compare, we have to get a really clear picture of what the Royal Canadian Mounted Police actually is and what exactly it is they do. We need to set our benchmark. So, the RCMP is Canada's national police force, but that description honestly doesn't do it justice. Their scope is absolutely massive. They operate at the federal level, the provincial level, and even the local municipal level. It is one single organization doing a job that, in most other countries, would be split up among a dozen different agencies. And they didn't just pop into existence like this. They actually started way back in 1873 as the Northwest Mounted Police. They were basically a frontier force tasked with bringing law and order to the vast, wild Canadian West. It wasn't until 1920 that they were merged and got their modern name, starting them on the path to becoming the incredibly complex organization they are today. So, what does this multifaceted mandate really look like in practice? Well, they handle federal law enforcement and national security, which you'd probably expect. But here's what makes them so unique. They also serve as the provincial police for most of Canada. They provide community policing to hundreds of towns, and they even get involved in international operations and border services. It's an unbelievably broad, all-in-one role. Now let's bust a really common myth right now. The RCMP is not the only police force in Canada. Far from it. Big cities like Toronto and Vancouver have their own police forces, and so do the entire provinces of Ontario and Quebec. The RCMP primarily steps in to provide that provincial and municipal policing in areas that don't have their own dedicated local force. So now that we have a good sense of the RCMP's integrated do-it-all model, let's head south of the border. Because in the United States, you find a completely different philosophy for law enforcement. And this right here is the crucial takeaway. There is no single agency in the U.S. that does what the RCMP does. It just doesn't exist. Instead of one force, the duties are divided up among a whole network of them. The comparison you hear most often is with the FBI. And look, on the surface, you can see why. The FBI is the main federal investigative agency in the U.S., and they handle the big stuff: counterterrorism, organized crime, major cybercrime. But that comparison really only goes so far. The FBI's jurisdiction is very specific. It's strictly limited to federal crimes. They're investigating a case of espionage or a major bank heist, not your local burglary or a traffic violation. For that, you need a completely different agency. All that local work is handled by this incredibly complex web of city police departments, county sheriffs, and state troopers. And even if we just stick to the federal level, the FBI is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. You've got the DEA for drug trafficking, the U.S. Marshals for hunting fugitives. The list goes on and on. So all of this really builds to the core difference, doesn't it? And it's not a question of which system is better, but about understanding two fundamentally different philosophies: integration versus specialization. And this illustrates the contrast perfectly. In Canada, you have a single, integrated force built for versatility, able to work across all levels of government. In the United States, you have a decentralized network of specialized forces, where each agency is an expert in its own, much more focused domain. Now, what's really fascinating here is when you put the RCMP and FBI side by side. Just look at the row for community policing. For the RCMP, it's a core, fundamental part of what they do every single day. For the FBI, it's not really on their radar. And that one point is the key distinction. One is a national police force. The other is a national investigative agency. They're two totally different jobs. So why this huge difference? You've got two neighboring countries that share so much. How did they end up with such distinct systems for law enforcement? Well, it certainly wasn't an accident or some kind of oversight. The lack of a direct American equivalent to the Mounties is the deliberate result of two very different national philosophies about law, about order, and about the role of government itself. Think of it like this.
Canada was faced with the challenge of policing a massive, sparsely populated land, so it created a centralized federal force that could project authority from coast to coast. The U.S., on the other hand, was founded on a deep-seated skepticism of centralized power. Its constitution emphasized states' rights, and that led directly to a law enforcement system that is intentionally decentralized, with power spread out among thousands of separate agencies.
So, the answer to what's the U.S. equivalent of the RCMP is that there isn't one. The entire philosophy behind it is different. Which, of course, leaves us with a much bigger, more interesting question to think about. A single unified national force, or a vast network of specialists? Which model is better equipped to handle the complex challenges of our time?